Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, my guest is Nate Kapitanski, also known as Jammaster Nate on Twitter. He's a friend of Sam Miller, one of our previous podcast guests. He comes from a tech background, and now he's hosting high-end Airbnbs in Colombia. Longtime expat, been living in Colombia for many years, knows the region well. And so I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about. Nate, how's it going, man?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me on. It's good to speak to somewhere other than Twitter for once.
Absolutely. Well, starting with Twitter, maybe tell us, where does Jam Master Nate come from? Where does your alter ego come from there?
Yeah, that's funny because nobody here really gets it, like none of the locals. But I was just like a really big Run DMC fan back when I was a little bit younger, and
Mhm.
kind of super into that old school hip hop stuff. And so I just stole Jam Master J and turned it into Jam Master Nate, as when I was like literally sitting there at Twitter.com back in like 2018 thinking, what do I do for a username?
And now you're stuck with it.
Yeah, now I'm stuck with it. And so go for like people here will call me Jam or something if they see me on Twitter or Instagram and they don't really know that's not my name.
Good. So why don't you tell the people, the audience, a little bit about your background, maybe where you're from, how you ended up in Latin America slash Colombia, and yeah, I just run me through it.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in New England, and I was never really a fan of it. Like since I was little, I was always looking to get out and move somewhere warmer, somewhere more interesting. There wasn't a lot of opportunities there, and I noticed that since I was little. And eventually, for a little while, I bounced around like California and New York City, and then I just kind of got sick of New York City, even because the winters are pretty rough. So I ended up moving to Miami. Like I was doing pretty good financially at that time, like making money online. Um, uh, Essentially, been in the software industry, and so I said, let me go to Miami. And this was like 2006, 7. And so at the time, Miami was definitely not the Miami it is now. Um, but it was cool. Like Miami was an up and coming city that was cool.
Hmm.
And, like the Miami Heat had just won the championship back then. And a lot of eyes were on Miami. I think they did like the MTV VMAs there or something. And it just seemed really cool. And so I actually ended up taking a trip to Florida for work. And then I hopped over to Miami and I really liked it right away. So I moved there like right after pretty much and just started working remotely in the winters from there. And the funny thing about Miami, after growing up in New England, is that it's just so different. It's so Latino. Like you're exposed to Latinos, obviously, in New York and California, but it's just very different with so many Cubans and Colombians. And, at the time, like a lot of Venezuelans were starting to come. Um, so essentially, like my group of friends that I met there were Cubans and Colombians, and so after a couple of years, I think it was Labor Day weekend, my friend said, "Hey, let's go to Medellin. Let's go to check out Colombia." And he was actually Colombian, and he said, "It'll be safer with me." Like I didn't even speak Spanish at the time, so obviously he said he'll translate and yeah, we'll have a good time. It'll be cool. Like he was explaining that Colombia had gotten safer and all of that, so nothing to worry about. So him and my other buddy from New York, we went down, and just the first night we were like, "This is awesome." And that was like all the motivation I needed to learn Spanish. And so this was, you have to, in context, this was like after the financial crisis in the U.S. kind of.
Hmm.
So when I moved to Miami, things were pretty cheap still. And then uh, as we were like coming out of the financial crisis, stuff started getting really expensive. So it was definitely an eye opener coming to South America or coming to Colombia specifically. I had been to Brazil before, but it was much more expensive. And so coming to Colombia and seeing, just how strong the dollar was, how good you can live. And it was kind of just like, why am I paying these Miami prices? And again, this was like back in the day, Airbnb was kind of new, but Airbnb had gotten a little bit more established at that point. So it was becoming a viable option to pretty much live anywhere in the world on Airbnb. Off like $2,000, $3,000 a month. That was like a lot,
Hmm.
obviously. So
And
it
so,
became
what year was it? The first year you went to Colombia?
the first year that I went here to visit was 2013. So it's been 9 years now. Um, and then I came back fully to live in like 2015.
That's a good amount of time. So you started living full time in 2015. How did you choose what city?
That's a funny question because I feel like I still haven't chosen a city.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I really like about Colombia is that there's a lot of cool places. So I'm a big fan of Medellin. I'm a big fan of Bogota. I'm a fan of the coast, uh, and Cali's great. There's all these cool places. So I feel like I have a little bit of like ADHD, and I'm always like, oh man, I want to be in, I want to be in Bogota. I want to be in the place that I'm not at the moment. So it's cool because it keeps it fresh. Like, you literally just hop on a flight, and 30 minutes later from Medellin, you're in Bogota.
Hmm. So what city have you spent the most time in?
Yeah, I would say I've definitely spent the most time in Medellin though. Um, so what I'm working on now is kind of like foreign real estate investments, and I've mostly concentrated that in Medellin. Um, so I've definitely been spending the most time there. That was definitely where I started. And kind of on your last question, Medellin was really good for Spanish, like Spanish schools. There's a lot of reasons that people were talking about it a while ago. That's why like Medellin's super popular now. But like it was really good for a beginner in Colombia.
Definitely makes sense. And I think we only mentioned offline. I don't think I've said it in the episode yet, but you are friends with Sam Miller, who was one of our early podcast guests. Sam's also well known for doing Airbnb and stuff in Colombia. When did you originally meet him?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I met him in like 2017 or 18 in Bogota. I think actually at Gringo Tuesday was the first time we met and just kind of bumped into each other. Like, oh, I know who you are. You're the super tall. You're like he stands out, right? So it was like, oh, there's Sam. Let me go talk to this guy because I think maybe we had spoken over email,
Hmm.
about like, hey, I'm interested in investing in Bogota, and so we had spoken over email, but yeah, I think that was like 2018, and then I've definitely hung out with him a few times before. I met Medellin now, and yeah, he's a super cool guy, and also friends with Jake Nomada. He's also one of my buddies too. So I know you've had him on here.
Hmm.
He's a fan of the podcast and fan of your work.
That's awesome. And I did actually want to mention this. So, Gringo Tuesdays, why don't you tell people what this legendary event, Gringo Tuesdays, is for those who don't know?
Oh yeah, so it started in Bogota, but it's actually in Medellin now too. And it's just there's nothing else to do on Tuesday nights really. So I don't know who the people are, but they started this party a long time ago, and it starts as a language exchange, really like after work, and then it turns into a nightclub like environment essentially. At night around 9 p.m. And it's just super well known because again, nobody really has anything else to do on Tuesdays, and so it's well known in the gringo and like our gringo expat communities, and it's pretty cool actually if you're trying to learn a language. Like I'm actually interested now to go to something like that and be able to speak Portuguese to people because I'm trying to learn Portuguese. So
Hmm.
I see why locals do it now.
Yeah, maybe you've heard of Mundo Lingo. Um, it's like a chain of events like that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's obviously best to be practicing with another live person like in front of you, and so they have it in Medellin as well now. I've gone to that. I've stopped by that a couple times, but it's definitely not as epic as the Bogota one.
And the so at that point in time, I imagine that Sam Miller was pretty well known for his YouTube channel and especially in Bogota, people probably knew who he was. Was there kind of for lack of a better word, like a value differential when you knew he was, and you were like, Sam, like, what's up? And I don't know. Tell me how did that go?
Yeah, no, I mean he's a super nice guy, so he's super approachable. But you're right though, his channel was definitely one of the early gringos exploring Colombia, not just Bogota or Medellin. Like he's done a lot of videos all around Colombia, and the company that he was working with, Life Afar, they were super well known, and so I'm sure he got it all the time. I'm sure it wasn't just me who came up to him.
Hmm. And when did you make your first? Actually, before I'll come back to the Airbnb stuff later. So you mentioned Jake Nomada. You've hung out with him in Bogota or in Colombia?
That's a good question. I don't think I actually have hung out with him in Colombia. So I know on the last episode with him, he was talking about Paraguay, and I actually went on that trip as well. So we've hung out in Paraguay, Mexico. Um, I forget a few other places. I actually don't know if we hung out in Colombia. I can't remember.
Interesting. So you went on that early Paraguay trip, and this is at a point when Paraguay was very unknown. When did you guys go? Like 2018?
I think it was 2019. It was the year before COVID, I believe. And it was just, like we'd been talking about travel, and I think he was down there in Argentina, and then he was going there, and I said, man, if I'm ever going to go to Paraguay, like it's better if I go while a friend is there, right? So, um, yeah, I went. And it's funny because another reason that I was interested in Paraguay was the buddy from Miami who took me to Medellin. He also, I believe, after that trip in, no, it was actually a separate trip, but he went back to South America, and he went all over, and he actually went to Paraguay as well and said it was really cool. So I had been looking for that excuse to go to Paraguay for a while.
And did you go on the trip to sort of like the north of the country where you saw Lopez's the marker, the statue where Lopez died in that national park up at Cerro Cora, whatever it's called?
Yeah, no, I didn't go on that. I had Jake was there for like a month, I think, or a little bit longer, and I basically went for 10 days or something like that. I couldn't escape for too long. I was working on some stuff in Miami,
Hmm.
so he went with our other buddies. That he told the story about meeting them on the plane, but yeah, unfortunately, I missed that. But I did get a good tour around Asuncion.
Did you go down to Encarnacion?
No, I didn't get to. We didn't really leave the city that time. We kind of just hung out in the city and went all
Yeah,
around.
it's tough to do in a short trip. It's like a 6 hour bus ride or something.
Yeah, I would have loved to do yeah, all that stuff like on the border, and um, he did some other stuff like he went to Foz de Iguazu, or he went over to that area as well, and I had done that before when I had to go to like a wedding in Foz. So yeah, he kind of planned that, I think, around me like leaving.
Nice. So you've been all over the region, but Mexico, Paraguay, etc. But you've kind of made Colombia your home. Why Colombia? How did you choose Colombia?
Yeah, so I've been to the majority of South America, and the first trip I went to Brazil, and it was pretty cool, but it was definitely expensive. Living nice in Rio is definitely expensive, and then we did all that other stuff like Chile and Argentina, but it didn't really click for me. Like Chile definitely didn't click for me, but like I said, when I went to Colombia, it was just right away like, oh, this is awesome. Um, it was just you felt it, and so I had a lot of desire to go back and really try and spend time here in Colombia. But I mean, there really are a lot of other awesome places. I'm definitely now that I've traveled around even more in the region. I definitely am a fan of Peru. Ecuador is cool. It's a little different. Like the weather's not so great there, but there's a lot of really cool places. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of Colombia, and has a lot of things going for it with like the temperature. Again, because I'm from the north in the U.S. and the cold, like I really like warm weather. So that was definitely one thing that attracted me and kept me here. And it's a little bit of the reason why it's hard for me to live in Bogota full time and like to spend too much time there, because the gray, colder weather kind of kills me. Even though I love large cities, but yeah, just there's so many little things that all add up in Colombia for me, like
Let's
lifestyle,
go through.
weather.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go through some of those little things, like that add up to make you say that this place is awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So first, proximity to the U.S., right? Like it's the first country, right, at the top of South America. So it's such an easy flight from Miami. Um, and the time zone, when I was working remote, like the time zone was just great. It's right now it's equal to Eastern Standard Time, and the other half of the year it's an hour behind Eastern Standard Time. So it's a very easy remote work schedule. Like I've spent a lot of time in Asia as well, and it can be pretty brutal knowing that you have to do a call at 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. Uh, uh, time in Asia.
Hmm.
So I imagine with remote work, like that's one of the things that people are really looking at in terms of this region in general.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, like the time zone, again, the climates, it's super cool that Colombia is such a diverse country. It's not a super huge country compared to the US or anything like that, but it has so many different climates. Like I'm here on the coast right now and it's super warm. I just went to Cali this weekend with some friends, and it was a little bit less warm, but it was warmer than Medellin, for example, and it was two steps warmer than Bogota. So, and that's all within, a 30 to 70-minute flight.
Yeah. So good flight connections to the states, good weather, pretty cheap.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh,
Things are going up in cost somewhat because of inflation. Like the things that they're importing are going up, but it's still super cheap. The peso is dropping, so other things are cheaper. And for example, like Airbnb prices have gone up definitely. So that's one of the things that I'm referring to. That's gone up. Like there's just so much more tourism now that the demand has increased the prices. Um, yeah.
what are your thoughts on the coast of Colombia? By which I guess I mean the northern coast.
Yeah, I really, really love it. One of my favorite places is definitely Parque Tayrona, just outside of Santa Marta. Like when people ask me what's my favorite beach, with no hesitation, I can say this place called Bahia Concha. It's like the closest beach that's technically Parque Tayrona to Santa Marta.
Hmm.
So it's very easy to stay in Santa Marta and then arrive there. But there's just so much really nice stuff over there, and really along that coast to like Palomino towards Rio Hacha, La Guajira, but those are definitely more remote and like you kind of are unplugged, like you're kind of off the grid once you get over there. But even Cartagena, I mean, there's really nice chain of islands, Islas de Rosario, I believe is the name, de Rosarios, and those are super beautiful as well. Most people probably go to Baru, um, but the islands are awesome as well. It's just if you like beaches, like after living in Miami, I became a huge fan of the beach. So I like to be close to the beach, and even if you're in Medellin or Bogota, it's so easy to travel to the coast. So again, that's a super plus
Hmm.
of being here, and they're starting to up their game on the coast now in terms of accommodations as well, accommodations and connectivity, because for a lot of people that internet connection is
Yeah,
the
like
most.
the Santa Marta internet was always pretty bad.
Yeah, and they're definitely creating like higher end hotels and things like that for people that are not looking for like hostels or sleeping on a hammock, things like that.
So I think most people have been to the, I guess, Santa Marta, Barranquilla, Cartagena corridor.
Hmm.
And I think not a lot of people make it all the way to the Rio Hacha and that sort of peninsula. I don't know the name of the actual whole peninsula there, but it's like very desert like, right? Is it tell us more about like how things are out there. You go to La
Like Guajira.
Guajira.
Yep. Yep.
There's a place called El Cabo that looks cool. I have some like random stars in my phone from different spots, but I've never made my way out there. Could you describe it to the people a bit?
Yeah, sure. So that was something that I did last year, and then I've been exploring a little bit of the other side of the coast of Colombia this year, towards like Monteria, like south of Cartagena, essentially. So that's also really cool. But the La Guajira that you're talking about, like
Hmm.
I went there. Basically, we started in Santa Marta. We went to Santa Marta, then Palomino, and then stopped in Rio Hacha, and then we went to the place you were talking about, Cabo de la Vela. And man, I have to say, it's definitely super cool and interesting, but it's honestly one of the more unfortunate things that you'll see in Colombia. Like the poverty is just next level. It's probably comparable to Africa level of poverty there. And
It's like worse up there than down on the other side on the Pacific coast, like Buenaventura and stuff.
I actually haven't gone to Choco yet and that Pacific coast over there specifically. So I don't have that comparison yet. That's on my list, but it is really bad. It's really rough, man. And for an example, like that ride was really tough because it's so hard to see the road. Even I mean, the road is really just a dirt track, and when we went, it was like the end of rainy season, so we had to continuously ask the locals like along the way, hey, can we continue ahead, or do you know if it's flooded, like do we have to go off road? And so luckily, again, I was actually with that same buddy from Miami, uh, who brought me to Colombia, and we rented a car. We rented like a SUV, and I mean, you need an SUV. You cannot do that in a regular car. And a lot of the tours that take you over there are definitely like souped up SUVs, um, because it's no joke to arrive over there, and it's just
Hmm.
really rough, and you're going super slow. It's not on the map. It's not that far from Rio Hacha, but it's a long, like bumpy, slow journey, and it's extremely basic over there. It's extremely beautiful, and I believe it's like kite surfer heaven over there.
Hmm.
So if you're a kite surfer, definitely recommend it. But it's a journey, man.
Interesting. I didn't realize it was quite that rough because it looks like the I don't know. I just see the highway line on Google Maps and looks decent, but
Yeah, I don't think that's the. Yeah, I mean, once you get over there, it's definitely not a highway. I can tell you that.
fair enough. But it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really really nice. It's just
Have you
it's tough because you
good?
struggle with it. It's like this natural beauty, and then you just honestly feel bad for everybody over there. Like it's an obvious failure of the government.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of beautiful places in the world that don't quite have the infrastructure. So next question would be: have you been to Valle du Par?
That's funny you say that because that's extremely high on my list right now. I have not been, but there's actually a direct flight now from Barranquilla, and that gets you there pretty quick. And it has like a really good time. Like you can go for a Friday night and leave Sunday afternoon or Monday morning.
Hmm.
So that'll be coming up in the next couple months. There's a lot of
And what do you?
people. There's a lot of people from Valledupar here. Like I actually just had lunch with someone from there.
And so you're in Barranquilla right now.
I am. Yep.
What tell people a little bit about Barranquilla, the least touristic major city along the coast.
Yeah. So it's super well known for the carnival, and it's the second largest carnival, other than the one in Rio, Brazil. But it's just a place with really good energy. I really like it. It's too hot for a lot of people, but again, I kind of have become accustomed to the warm weather after Miami. So, and there's certain seasons that are definitely warmer, like being here in June, July, August is pretty brutal, but
Hmm.
the weather's taming down a little bit right now. Um,
Right in the winter, quote unquote, less humid.
yeah, yep. It's a city that's growing because of the port. It's in a pretty essential port, so they have there's a lot of like middle class people here, and businesses are growing here, but it's definitely not. It's a tourist city. It's literally like right in the middle of Santa Marta and Cartagena. So a lot of times people come here to check it out if they're in one of those. I was actually that was what I did the first time I was in Cartagena, and I arranged one of the shared vans to bring me to Barranquilla, and it kind of just dropped me off and threw me into the mix, which was really good for my Spanish. It was really good practice at the time because it's so fast and they have a lot of different slang here. So it was like an interesting learning experience, like kind of like a test, a challenge at the time.
Hmm. Pretty good like party scene. What does it kind of look like from a nightlife perspective in Barranquilla?
Yeah, from a nightlife perspective, um, it's had the same places for a long time. So literally, one of my friends here, he told me that one of the main places here, which is called the Frog, uh, or Frog Legs, I believe is like the full name, but everybody just calls it Frog. Like he's been going there for 15 years, and it's pretty much the same as it was. And then there's another like main street that has more local spots, and there's this infamous place La Troja, which is like salsa and just crazy costeño energy. It's a wild place.
Yeah, and I guess for people that are unfamiliar with costeños and sort of what that signifies in Colombia, like how would you sort of like categorize the different cultures regionally in Colombia, and then I guess costeño culture specifically?
Yeah, sure. Hopefully the costeños, if anyone listens to this who's costeño, hopefully they don't kill me. But the costeños definitely have they
Best
have
efforts.
yeah. They have the stereotype is just that they're a little lazy. Like they're living on the coast near the ocean, and it's kind of like island life. Like things are a little slower pace. Things go at their own pace here, and I love it. But it's true. I mean, it really is true. Like it's hard to get people to show up on time or do exactly what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it. So it's tough as a foreigner to get used to that. But
Hmm.
and like you compare that with culture in like Medellin, like the paisas are known for being super entrepreneurial, and so you still have issues like just coming from the US, we're just accustomed to a different level of service and our expectations are very different. So I mean, it really applies to everywhere in the country. It applies to a large portion of South America from what I've seen. Um, Again, I hope someone doesn't kill me for saying that, but Bogota is really the place where people get stuff done. Like Bogota is the New York of Colombia. People are moving around faster. Like life's a little bit more faster paced. They really have the highest expectations there, and you find the most people that like have moved from other places to try and make it in Bogota and try and live there. And so
Hmm.
more people like live by themselves, and they're more focused on their work, their career. That's really where the largest companies are in Colombia, other than some big ones that are also in Medellin. But that's kind of like if you look at like the three biggest places, kind of like the coast, Medellin and Bogota. That's kind of the summary, I guess, that I would use for those various regions and the stereotypes.
Yeah, go into it a little bit more though with the costeños. So I think, for example, one thing is I think on the coast they drink more rum, whereas up in the mountains it's more aguardiente, for example.
It's so funny because it's so true. Like if you order a bottle of aguardiente in Medellin, I mean, you can give it out to all the locals. They're going to be super excited. If you order a bottle of rum or whiskey in Medellin, they're not going to be that excited to like share the bottle with you. And I've been going back and forth between Medellin and Barranquilla recently, so I've literally seen this in the last like month. So yeah, on the coast, you got to order some rum. And then, like I said, I was just in Cali. You go to Cali for the weekend, and they have their own Valle de Cauca type of aguardiente there. So you have to order that.
Are you familiar with Champeta music?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's crazy as a foreigner. You're just like, what is this music? But it's amazing. It's so cool when you see the people dancing it and like girls dancing it, and it's just, I mean, it's hard. It's like super fast, so it's kind of like you're running, But
Hmm.
I love that music. You know, they throw it in the mix here. The nightlife is more like there's not as much dedicated reggaeton as there would be like in Medellin. Like everywhere you go in Medellin is mostly going to be reggaeton, unless you seek out a place with kind of like a mix of everything. But here it's really a mix of like reggaeton, some salsa, or um, a vallenato, and then champeta definitely is thrown in as well.
Right. So they're kind of because it's kind of a meeting of worlds, or they're trying to balance all the sounds.
Yeah, yeah, but it's like the urban music of Colombia now, or the urban coastal music of Colombia. So
Champeta, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the first time I was introduced to it, I fell in love. I was like, "What is this? This is hilarious." It kind of reminded me of like Brazilian funk music a bit.
exactly. Yeah, it's kind of their urban take on it, and it's really cool. It's definitely something that's grown on me, but I really like it now. Like I'm a fan. My buddy here is actually doing a documentary with another local on kind of like the history of Champeta. So he's been showing me all this footage, going around all these uh, places that are like historically significant to the origins of Champeta around Cartagena, and I think like to the south of there.
Hmm.
So it's been kind of cool to see some of that stuff recently.
Right, because it's both Cartagena and Barranquilla.
Yeah, I believe Champeta is technically from Cartagena, but because Barranquilla is so close, like it's super popular here, and they've adopted it. But I really think it's that whole coast, you know, down to like Sincelejo and that area even.
Yeah, if anyone's listening, I highly recommend you open your Spotify or I guess just YouTube and look for a Champeta playlist. So it's spelled Champeta, Champeta, and it's just like very high RPM, and it's impossible to not dance.
Yeah, I actually have a really good Champeta playlist here on Spotify. It's called Champeta 2000, 2021, and it has like a Colombian flag after it. So if you see that one, that's I've been jamming out to lately.
It is very fascinating how different the regions of Colombia can be, because there's definitely a lot more regional variation in Colombia than, of course, in the U.S., for example.
Yeah, absolutely. But it also kind of spills over into Venezuela culture really as well, because obviously they're neighbors right here on the coast.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of people from Maracaibo in Venezuela here,
Hmm.
and like I meet a ton of people from there over here now as they've migrated, and so like it's super. Everybody's told me that it's super similar to their culture over there.
Yeah, there's a bit of a continuum, I think, between Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, and then Ecuador as well, to an extent.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. And then yeah, once you get to Peru, it kind of becomes a little different.
It definitely changes. But it's like in these four countries, like they all say vaina for cosa, for example, and they have a lot of like similar terms like pelao for kid, stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. The you definitely have to learn Baina before you come here because you're gonna hear it all the time.
So I'm trying to think what to go over next. We talk a little bit about Airbnbs, not even just a little bit. Let's do a deep dive, because this is I guess kind of one of your main areas of expertise. And when I asked Sam Miller, I said, "What should I ask Jammaster Nate about?" He said, "You got to ask him about the Airbnb stuff, and specifically remote Airbnb ownership."
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was actually just listening to the podcast recently, and your last guest that you had on, at least at the time we're recording this, was David, and he was talking about some of his Airbnb stuff as well. So
Hmm.
that was really cool to hear. You know, his is really at a different scale than mine. He obviously has more units, but so yeah, the story with my Airbnbs is that, like I said, coming from Miami, I've always kind of been interested in real estate, but I didn't really have the funds for it at the time, living in Miami. But I was trying to buy my first place in Miami, and then when you come to Colombia, you just see like the huge difference in prices, especially back in like 2015 when I started looking, and so it all started because it was just hey, look, like I can finally afford something high end, really nice, and like it's in my budget. And so I made my first investment in Medellin, It's a building that's super well known, super infamous now. It's called Energy Living because it was like one of the first like high end short term rental places, and it has a really cool pool on the like the 22nd floor on the roof with like an awesome view of the city.
Hmm.
So that was really my first. That was my first real estate investment in general, and it was here in Colombia. But then, um,
How did you finance it?
yeah, so you really do have to pay cash for everything. Like I said, I had been kind of saving for Miami, but everything here is cash. As a foreigner, you're completely outside of their system, so you're not going to be able to get a local loan. Even if you did, it would be like a 10% interest rate or above. And kind of in retrospective, maybe that's not so bad because the peso devalues so quickly. But yeah, it's just you're like it's going to be super hard for you to even get that. So I
Right,
kind of
right,
had
right.
these funds saved up, and I was able to buy the first place. And I had a buddy who does property management in Medellin. Again, Sam was only in Bogota really at the time. Life Afar had their Medellin arm, but I
Hmm.
actually have another friend who was in real estate as well, and so I had his company managing the unit, and things were good. Like returns were good, and this was when Airbnbs were even cheaper in Medellin. But I'm super focused on like the experience and the design and making things really really good for digital nomads because like I'm my best audience, I'm my best customer. I've stayed in over 100 and something Airbnbs now, so I know like what's a good Airbnb and what's a bad Airbnb. And I just wanted to set the place up really good for myself, so like use it for myself when I wanted to be there and when I wasn't, to be able to rent it out. And when you really focus on that stuff, like it's not so hard to find other good clients.
And so you've scaled up from one unit to more. Talk a bit about what scaling looked like for you.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting because like I said, I want to be everywhere, right? So it started out as really just Medellin, and then it was like, oh, I love Bogota too, I want to buy a place here. So I saved up for a while, bought another place in Bogota. It was cheaper than Medellin, so and the returns are a little bit lower there. But I bought in Bogota, and things went pretty good there. And then I was coming to Barranquilla a lot, and the Airbnbs are just really really bad here.
So you noticed in Barranquilla that no one was really doing it properly. There was nothing targeted towards the digital nomad market that maybe made sure they posted the Wi-Fi speed or who knows. So you came in. What'd you do in Barranquilla?
Yeah, so because Barranquilla is definitely a second tier city, things were definitely not set up so great for digital nomads here. Like they're pretty rough, and some of the hotels are okay, but if you're gonna be here, it's like I definitely prefer an Airbnb. So after staying in a lot of Airbnbs here, it was just a decision that I really liked the city, and so I was gonna do the same thing again, where set it up ideally for myself, exactly how I want it, and then when I'm not here, to be able to rent it out. And it's extremely tough to find something that's like up to standards of most Americans. It's not like there's not so many great buildings here. But I was able to find this really really cool unit in a building here in the north of Barranquilla, and so that was actually at the time that was my cheapest apartment that I had bought in as well, just because the difference between price per square meter is
Hmm.
much lower here. So I took that leap of faith and bought a place here, and it's been going pretty good so far on Airbnb as well. This was like about 3 years ago now.
What it cost, like 50 grand?
No, it was still around like 135, 140 somewhere around there at the time with the exchange rate.
Okay.
But this was a much larger apartment, so that's why I say the price per square meter is much better here. I mean, it's half of Medellin, or what it was half at the time. It would probably be even larger than that now. But and then so from here, it kind of became an issue of like I have these apartments all over Colombia, and I don't have the best management system. Like I have one person managing the Medellin one, another person in Bogota handling it. I kind of just had to find another person who was already doing Airbnbs here in Barranquilla and ask them to help me as well, be like my local contact, my local host. And then COVID happened, and I really, as I'm sitting there, I was kind of like, I need to focus on an area. You know, I need to kind of get to a level of scale where I can have someone managing, where it makes sense to have like my own people who work for me managing like the group of apartments. And so I really doubled down on Medellin, and it was an interesting bet because it's worked extremely well. Like Medellin has just grown like crazy since COVID. So that's been working really well. But that's the point I'm at right now, where I have my own employee, and we're managing all the stuff myself in Medellin now that I have 3 apartments there.
Okay, interesting. And were you able to take on financing for any of them, or did you have to like bring in partners?
No, again, the financing is really really tough here. Like I would probably recommend for most people who want to buy something in Colombia that they try and get a loan in the U.S. or in their home country uh, and use it for the payments in Colombia. You know, you could maybe do something like own seller financing here. Like maybe somebody would be into that. I know somebody who's done that, so it is possible. But I was kind of lucky with my job, my company, and we sold the company back in 2018. And so this was how I had this capital. I was kind of looking like, what do I do with this money now that I've sold my company? And uh, so that was really the question. That was why I needed to focus on an area.
Hmm. Definitely makes sense. Medellin must be a very interesting place to have Airbnbs because, it's a party city, and you must get some crazy guests.
Oh man! So now that I'm doing this myself, I haven't had anything too crazy so far. But all the stuff that you read about Medellin online is definitely true, and like things happen there. So it's a very different guest than Bogota.
Someone's gonna die in your unit, bro. I don't know.
Oh man, don't say that. Knock on wood.
So for this next question, Nate, you and I were talking offline, debating if we should even include it, but I think it's worth talking a little bit about scopolamine, if I'm pronouncing it right, scopolamine,
Sure.
and devil's breath. It's just become such a huge thing in Colombia, especially in the past couple months. There was a story of the Asian kid that passed away, and I imagine. Probably to some close friends or people even people with experience in Colombia, it's probably happened in the past year.
Yeah, so it's a weird topic, but it's an important one right now because you know, as an Airbnb host, I definitely want to make sure that guests don't have issues, right? Like you don't want to babysit your guests. That's definitely not what I want to do. But like everybody should stay safe because it's very different than the U.S. It's very different than what people know in the U.S. and the norms, and like people think that. Like they come to Medellin and you know they go out with someone that they don't really know, and then bad things can happen. So one important thing to mention there too is that when people talk about this unfortunate situation of like people being drugged and they use the word scopolamine, I feel like it's actually, well, there's actually evidence of this, but it's kind of just a blanket term for like these druggings because a lot of the time it's not actually scopolamine specifically. There's been, like, I've read over the years various news articles where people have unfortunately died, like they've been killed from these druggings, and then you know they'll follow up with like they'll mention like the autopsy came back as this, and so a lot of the times it's actually pharmaceuticals like prescription medicines like Xanax and stuff that they're putting in, that they're you know dropping in your drinks, and those have a crazy multiplying effect with alcohol. So it's extremely dangerous for your body, and then you're just out. But people use it like I said, like it's kind of a blanket term for describing the situation that's happening, and it's not.
Right,
It's
because I
hard.
guess with scopolamine, like people are still awake in sort of like a zombie like state,
Yeah.
and they can sort of, you can like get people to do things for you, and it's a weird sort of like compliance drug, I guess you could say. But I guess if it was to be other drugs, like let's just say Xanax or something like that, that's to basically just like knock someone out when you're like, for example, already in their apartment.
Yeah, that's the stories that I've mostly heard. It's definitely happened when you're out as well. Like there's definitely been instances where I've heard that. I know, unfortunately, I know a lot of people who have had this happen to them.
Like
Um,
how many? Like how many?
uh, Personally, I know like four or five, and it actually, and somebody that I went to Cali with this weekend just got drugged there as well.
Jesus.
Yeah. So it's a real thing. I really want people to stay safe, like to come to Colombia and stay safe, but they have to be aware of these things. And so much of it can boil down to like two major safety points of like if you're gonna meet someone, you should really, I mean, you should not meet someone without verifying a social media presence, like whether that's an Instagram, whether that's a Facebook, because in every single instance, somebody has basically met someone, from a dating app or whatever, and then they disappear. Like they just unmatch you. They block you on WhatsApp, and that's all you have. You have no other connection to this person. You don't know anything else about this person. Like they just got their SIM card with that phone number from someone on the street, which is super easy to do. It's not like every
Hmm.
time you get a phone number here, it's extremely registered with like your ID and traceable and all that. So it's super important to, again, verify social media, like that this person's a real person, their profile looks real, like it's not brand new. They have friends leaving comments, things like that. And then the other thing is just like staying in a building with a doorman. That can help you so much because some of the people that I know, and this weekend in Cali, the person didn't have a doorman. And when you don't have a doorman, that just means that the people can come and go. Like you're knocked out, and they can take your keys, they can leave your apartment, they can come back to your apartment. They can make multiple trips to literally take everything from your apartment. And I mean, it's super unfortunate that it's come to this and that there's this scam. But a lot of people have heard about this, and they've seen maybe the infamous Vice video of
Hmm.
Scopolamine, like devil's breath, like like you said, like somebody blows it in your face and you become a zombie. But I think it's more common nowadays out there, giving like sleeping pills or these like Xanax's anxiety, and it's just knocking people out.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think this could like have a material effect on your Airbnb income? Do you think it could have a material effect on tourism in Colombia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've kind of been debating that recently because obviously Medellin is the place that most people have heard about this happening in. It's definitely not happening at the levels of Medellin, like in Cali or in Bogota, but it is also happening there. But there's such a demand for Colombia right now. Like people, tourism is up so much here that I'm not sure it would have a material effect for me at this point. But if things continue and they get really bad, and there's more deaths, there's a lack of proper like follow through and prosecution from the authorities who are catching these people, then it's possible. But it is somewhat of a topic that's being talked about a lot now, like where this wasn't happening 2-3 months ago.
And why do you think that is, just in the past 2 3 months, that it's come up more?
Well, at the time that we're recording this, it was like 2 weeks ago that somebody got killed in Medellin, an American that you mentioned, and yeah, he was unfortunately like murdered by by this. That they put something in his drink. I'm not sure what it was at this point. Uh, I'm curious of those details, if it was scopolamine or if it was a prescription drug, but that did happen recently, so that's kind of on everyone's mind. And because this was an American, like it's gotten a lot of news coverage here locally. I've seen a
Hmm.
lot of news coverage coming out of the U.S. Even I believe the family, like rightly so, is kind of putting this out there in the media and trying to put pressure on the U.S. embassy and then the Colombian authorities, obviously, to follow through and really bring justice here.
And it's worth noting that it's not just happening to foreign tourists, that even local Colombians are also getting drugged.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely over the years I've read stories of locals. Like I believe one of the ones I mentioned, the toxicology report was about a local. It's also happened to people who, they're foreign tourists, but their first language is Spanish. It's not like because they didn't know what was going on the day or with the people that they met. Like for example, one guy was a Cuban. He was unfortunately killed in Medellin as well, the same way.
Wow. Yeah, I saw a statistic that like 25% of all hospitalizations are due to this.
I don't know about that. That seems
Dude,
pretty.
I saw it. I was like, because think about how underreported it is, because everyone's embarrassed, etc. I mean, there's like Facebook groups that are like private Facebook groups where people are talking about this and trying to track people down and stuff. But I think most people don't even go that far. I think it's like widely underreported. But yeah, I saw something like 25% of all hospitalizations are due to scopolamine.
That's crazy, but that's absolutely true with underreporting. Unfortunately, a lot of people, because they don't know where to go. Their Spanish might not be so good to be able to explain it. And then when you wake up from all this, you don't feel good. Like you're out of it for a few days. So people aren't really in the best mental state to go report it properly and follow through. So that's definitely something that I've heard of a lot here.
Yeah, I didn't want to use too much of the episode to talk about it, but I don't know if you wanted to give it a little bit of a mention, and it's definitely quite topical. Any last thoughts on it?
Yeah, don't get in taxis with strangers either. Like never, like always order the taxi so you know where someone's coming from. Uh, and then
Right, never have the girl order the taxi or
yeah,
the
that's just
unknown
not
Colombian person.
yeah, that's just
Um,
not common. Like unfortunately, that's not the culture. Like as the male, you're kind of the provider. Like you're the one who invited them out, so you're the one expected to make sure that like they can arrive, that they can get home, things like that. And so it's super, it's a red flag if somebody's saying like, oh no, don't worry, like I got a taxi, or oh I already ordered a taxi, like get in this car. That's super sketchy.
right, right, or like, oh, my cousin can give us a ride, things like that.
Yeah, that's a red flag for sure.
Yeah. I'll switch it up for you though, because I don't want too much of the episode to be about that. But I guess just coming back to Airbnbs. So what would be some of your advice to people who are looking to get into the Airbnb market or just real estate investment market in Colombia or in Medellin? Is it too late? And they should have been a couple years earlier, or is there still enough opportunity?
Yeah, yeah, really good question actually, because I think I have some insightful info here. So I would say that people need to look at how they can differentiate themselves, because if you're just going to be another like mid-range or I don't know, mid-range, like you'll get lost in the mix essentially if there's too many Airbnbs. And so one of the things that I always focus on is differentiating myself. Like, what can I do better? What can I highlight that I do better? For example, like my work setups in the apartments where I have like standing desks and I have really good Herman Miller chairs compared to somebody with, a crappy $20 chair that they bought at a local store. And they're like, okay, cool, here's a desk and here's an uncomfortable chair for you to sit in for 8 hours.
Hmm.
But then also, people really need to know, they need to get familiar with the local regulations because things are changing a lot. They've changed a lot in other countries, uh, like the US and Mexico. So things are becoming much more regulated. So you can't just buy some apartment in some random building and then think you're going to be able to rent it out for 1 to 2 nights to people. Like you definitely have to follow the local laws now. And um, so that's super important because that it's really creating its own bubble of a market. There's thousands of buildings, but there's only, I don't know, a few dozen buildings that are like legal short term rentals. So if that's what you want to do, then you need to make sure that you're buying in a building that's properly licensed for all of this and that you can get your own license for your unit.
And isn't that a bit of a risk? Because what if 2, 3 years from now, let's just say something happens, God forbid someone gets scoped or just like some other issue, and let's just say the board, the building board decides, look, no more short term rentals. That could really be a big risk from an investment perspective.
Yeah, I would say that's already happened. It's uh like you can't do short term because that is the case. Like you're gonna get outvoted by all of the other owners or investors, like local investors or owners in that building, and they're not gonna want that. You know, they don't want gringos coming in, partying, and being obnoxious, stuff like that. So that's actually technically already the case. But if you have a building that already has this license and is properly set up for it, all those owners are not going to want to change that. Like they're essentially owner investors, and so.
Hmm.
Um, but the way it works in Colombia is you have to have like a certain amount of the percentage of the owners that are on like the board, the association, to be able to change anything, whether you change it from being short term friendly or being like being a long term building and wanting to change it to short term. So that's how they like do that process legally, and so you kind of know, or if you're looking at doing something like this, you should know what the structure of the association is, like how many votes you would need to be the majority, things like that. And it's kind of moved to a little bit of like a lot of savvy investors are really looking at buying like whole buildings. You know, they're looking not 20
That's what I
story
was gonna
buildings.
say, or buy like a house.
Yeah, well, houses, unfortunately, still a lot of the houses, like a house can be in a neighborhood that's an association, like in a gated neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
then you would have like your association and they could do the same thing in a house even. So, but that's definitely happening where people are buying buildings now because then they know, they have 2, 3, 4 story, 5 story buildings, maybe up to like 20 units or something like that. But a lot of them are just like maybe 4 to 8 units is more typical. And then, yeah, they buy the whole building, renovate the whole building, set it up super good for short term. Like you are the board, and you control that. But luckily in Colombia, there's also a thing where anything over 30 days is considered a long-term rental. So it's very different
Mm-hmm.
than the US, where, for example, in Miami, like anything under 6 months is a short-term rental in Miami, or 6 months and one day technically. But so it's just a very different local regulation right now. And there's other things that could change, like that. Like that would probably be the worst if that changed, because that would affect a lot of people and the flexibility that they have with their units now. But there's probably other things that are coming as well that are going to make it hard for people who are thinking about investing. Like the taxes are definitely extremely high. Your tax rate on your earnings here is like 35%. So you have to really get like a good return to then justify your after tax return. Um, but what else? For example, Mexico right now has a local like sales tax or whatever they want to call it
Mm-hmm.
on rentals. So you get your price, like you get $100 a night, and then you have the Airbnb fees, and then you have the local tax, and they also have that in Miami now too. And so I kind of feel like that's going to be coming in Colombia. Not It's not a question of like if it's going to be coming; it's just a matter of when.
And so, would you, at some point, ever look to expanding to, say, Mexico?
Um, I mean, I'm open. I'm definitely open to other places. The one thing that creates a headache and like it becomes another expense that you have to deal with and all that stuff is like if I was in a bunch of different countries and I would have to have local tax people, and all
Accountants.
those, yeah,
Yeah.
local accountants, like it can add a lot of complexity. So I thought a lot about that, and it's nice right now to just have like the U.S. and Colombia to deal with, because yeah, I looked at like Peru, I looked at Mexico, like over there in Playa del Carmen and Tulum back in the day, Spain, like I've looked over there.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would my next question would be, there's probably a lot of commonality that people could glean from this episode, even if they're not interested in investing in Medellin or investing in Colombia, but they're probably Canadian or they're American, and they're going to be investing in their first Latin American market. Maybe they're investing in Playa. maybe somewhere else, because they see an opportunity. And I think there's probably a lot of commonality between these places, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, whatever, just in terms of how the process works and things like that. What are, what are what are some of those things that you would tell a North American investor looking to invest in the Latin American market for the first time?
Yeah, so you definitely want to have a good lawyer. You want to have somebody who understands all the local regulation and all that stuff because while the process overall might be the same, there's definitely very particular things in the process of buying and how they do things and all the fees, like all the additional notary fees, which sometimes can be significant. So you really want to have a good local person, and obviously that person needs to speak English if you're not super good at Spanish, because even though my Spanish is pretty good now, like all these contracts and these things that you have to do, I mean, they're pretty advanced Spanish. Like, you're talking financial things, and it's extremely high level Spanish.
Hmm. So you get a good lawyer. What else? Like, have you ever had problems like moving the money from the States to Colombia?
There's a bank that is pretty common for foreigners to use. It's called Alianza Valores, and you have to set up an account with them because you don't have like a cedula, you don't have a local ID at the time to get like a Bank Colombia account usually. So they're kind of specialized in that, but all the lawyers should like have a good relationship with them and be able to expedite anything with them. But they also have a pretty strict due diligence process here, Alianza, like the banks, obviously because of the history of Colombia and moving money and things like that. So it's not the easiest process. It can be pretty drawn out, but you need that. Like, you don't want to do some weird transfer. Like, you want to follow a pretty proven process that most foreigners are going to be doing. Like, it should be very similar for most foreigners.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And so, are you setting up like an LOI on a property and making an offer on a property first, or do you bring the money into the country first so you have a bit more leverage and being like, "Look, bro, I got the cash. Like, let's do it," or do you make the offer first and then you go through expatriation of the money or whatever, and maybe that slows down the process?
Yeah, that's a good question because Colombian norms are definitely different. Like, people aren't that motivated to, people don't expect their properties to sell super quickly. So if you had the money here theoretically and you were like, look, I can do it really quick, I don't think that incentivizes them as much here. They're very much like, I bought it at this price, I want to sell it at this price. Like, if I have to wait 5 years to sell it at that price, they'll wait. It sounds crazy, but it's what you see a lot here. So me, I don't think I've ever had the money super ready to go. Just like, I haven't been able to use that as any leverage. And then once you get that account set up, you can do everything pretty quickly. Like, you could do everything within a week, really. So, and usually all the things like the, I think they call it a promesa, like the letter of intent, like with the
Hmm.
offer and everything, to sign that and then to go to closing. Like, they definitely need a little bit of time here usually. So yeah, I don't think it's not so common for people to do anything too quickly here.
What would be the time frame? Like, let's just say you visit a property, you like it, you're like, let's do it, man. I like this ocean view. This is the one. 125K. Let's do it. How long is that process gonna be, with all the steps?
So I would say there's two important things there. It's, if you already have the account set up with Alianza, then it would probably, like, your typical process would probably be, I mean, typical would probably still be 3, 4, 5 weeks, like, to sign everything, to get the person to go to the notary and do the closing, like all the little things in between. It probably would, yeah, it's probably still like a month, give or take a week, either way. If you don't have that account with Alianza set up yet, that process can sometimes take 2 to 4 or 5 weeks to set up as well. Like, unfortunately,
Mm.
they're not the most responsive at times. I've heard that from multiple people. So yeah, you're looking at another month possibly on top of that.
Okay, cool. Um, so I'll switch it up a bit and let's talk a little bit about residency and citizenship if you're open to that.
Yeah,
So I think most people are aware that it's possible to get residency in Colombia by making a real estate purchase. Did you go that route?
that is exactly what I did actually. Yeah, that was one of the reasons that um, I started down this path.
And I know that if you there's like thresholds, right? So it's like if you buy a property up to 150K or something, you get maybe a temporary resident permit, and if it's over the threshold or a significantly more amount, you can go straight to permanent resident. You must know a bit more about it than I do.
Yeah, so that's the general concept. The numbers are a little fuzzy about what they are now, and then that will be changing in like on January 1st that will adjust again. So if people are listening to this in 2023, then this might be outdated. But it's basically, yeah, you have those two tiers. You have like um anyway, I think it was like 30, 40,000 or something like that. Like if you invest that in Colombia, then you get a residency, like you get to live here, you get the visa. But I think you have to renew that every 1 or 2 years. And then, like you were talking about the upper tier visa, and that was what I got back at the time. And I think back in the day, it used to be around 150, but I think it's around 160, 170. Maybe that's changed with the peso changing so rapidly this year. But again, that's going to change at the end of the year, the beginning of 2023. So yeah, there's basically that first level and then the second level, and it's unfortunately changed this year. Like with Petro, they made some changes, and they're actually not giving like the super good visa that I had or that I have. Uh, that one is basically phased out, and you get the level below it now for doing that highest tier. So the one that I got was really great because it actually doesn't ever have an expiration date. It's
Oh
like
wow.
basically, yeah, like I could have this visa for life now. I don't have to like hold the real estate. I don't have to hold the money, anything like that. Like I completed the requirements back in 2016 or 17 or whatever it was, and now I'm good. But that's not the case anymore. It's I believe a 5 year validity, uh, but it's pretty easy to renew. Um, Again, you might want to just have like a lawyer to help you with that process and renew. I actually renewed mine earlier this year. Um, but yeah, you essentially get those two levels, and like it's a full, live here all you want, work here all you want. Uh, and then, so one of the benefits, which hopefully your listeners will find interesting because you talk about citizenship a lot, like this put me on a path to be able to be eligible for Colombian citizenship, and and then you would have like there's not super great benefits to that, but you get a second passport. For example, I believe you can go to Russia visa free. Obviously, Venezuela, which is a difficult visa to get as an American. So there's some visa benefits to it,
Hmm.
but man, it is extremely difficult to actually pass this test and become a Colombian citizen. So at the time when I got this, they didn't have this requirement of like doing like completing a test. I think it was 2020 that they introduced this new like hey, you have to pass this Spanish language test and this other knowledge test to get the citizenship. And so I've been working on that, and it is just crazy how difficult the test seems like it's going to be. It's it's basically covering like four things. It's covering obviously Spanish knowledge, like you have to be able to speak Spanish, write Spanish, and it's at somewhat of like an intermediate advanced level. And then it goes into things like the geography of Colombia, which is probably easiest, and then it goes into like historically significant dates and people in Colombia, uh, and then there's a few other things, but it's like random Colombia facts, and then and then you actually have to also study the Constitution of Colombia, which seems extremely difficult. That's the thing that's kind of scaring me now, like if I'm actually going to be able to do this or not.
Do you think it's gotten harder over time?
Well, they didn't have this. They didn't even have this test before. It was just like, okay, if you've had the visa for 5 years, then yeah, like fill out this paperwork and then you can become a Colombian citizen. But now it's like you have to do this test and pass the test. And there's actually a thing. I don't even know what happens if you fail it twice, but it says you can take it 2 times. So I don't know what happens if you fail 2 times. Like, are they going to make me wait
Because you
forever?
remember there was that one famous Colombia YouTuber, Zach Morris, I think, and he
Yeah.
got the Colombian passport. Do you think he did the test?
Oh man, I actually talked to him about it. So yeah, there's a couple of cool things that I can share here. So I talked to him about it, and I think he did a video on it. Even he like essentially because he was well known and kind of well respected like amongst Colombians. Somebody basically who had a family member behind the government like hooked him up and was like, "Oh, you want citizenship? Like, my dad can get it for you."
Okay,
Yeah.
the Latin
So there's
American way.
yeah. So that's the Colombian way to get it, right? Like just be connected to the right person. And then I spoke to someone this year. I spoke to them a few times this year to follow their progress, but it was like I was asking around, hey, have any foreigners actually done this test? And I had one girl from Ecuador. I'm not sure why exactly she wanted Colombian citizenship if she was already from South America, but she did the test and she said, "Oh my God, it was extremely difficult. Like I didn't even it was extremely difficult. She didn't study a ton, but obviously she knew the Spanish language stuff, so she passed that fine. But then she did study some of the geography and the holidays, things like that, like famous Colombian people. And she said that she thought she failed. Like she didn't think there was any way that she passed, but she got it. This was like she took the test like a long time ago, and I followed up with her a couple weeks ago, and she sent me the photo of like her ceremony where she got her Colombian citizenship. So it's almost like I actually feel like they made the test so hard. Somebody just, like we're gonna write the test like this, and they didn't think about how extremely difficult that would be in context. And then she probably actually did fail, and they were just like, whatever, give it to her.
Yeah, so you really got to study. Like I think it's typical. I think it's typical for most countries to have a test as part of the naturalization process. I think every country I've heard about in Latin America has that, Mexico, etc. And it'll typically include maybe knowing at least the first couple bars of the national anthem. It'll include maybe knowing some of the main rivers, like the names of the rivers. It might include knowing the names of historical presidents and important historical figures. Trying to think what else, but yeah, you need to know the country that you're naturalizing in for sure.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely taught me a lot studying this. So that's actually been super cool. But like if they just set the bar extremely high, then it's not going to be valuable for anyone because nobody's going to be able to pass this. I mean, so there's actually a study guide too. I should mention this because this is for anyone who's interested in Googling this, they can
Hmm.
Google like the Colombian citizenship study guide, and the government posts that on the website, and it's just like when you look at the questions, it's crazy, man. It's like name the last 10 presidents in order.
Really?
Yeah, that's like a question on there that they expect you to be able to answer.
And you know what happens in some countries though is it's the same test every year, or given to every applicant. Like they don't mix it up really.
Hmm.
And so the immigration lawyer that you work with through the naturalization process, they know the test. And sometimes they can either sit with you on the test as quote unquote a translator and sort of just like feed you the answers. Or you can like there's some things that if you have a good contact or a lawyer, they can sort of make it easier for you.
Well, that's a good tip. I appreciate that because I'm actually going to look into that then. But uh, I, so few people have done this that it's actually hard to find a lawyer though. You would think that because so many people have these visas that there'd be more of a business for this, but like I have spoken to a few lawyers now in Medellin, and they literally have no clients who have done this test.
successfully. Wow.
Just no one that's even taken it. Like nobody's wanted it. They're just happy with their visa for life. Again, it's a little bit like, do I really want this? How bad do I want another passport? Is Colombia the right country for it? There's a lot of negatives to it, to be honest, because it's a pretty not friendly tax country. So I'm still a little bit on the fence about it, but it's just surprising now that I've been researching this that so few people have done it, and like not just that they've successfully passed it, that like no one's even done this process except that one girl.
I think it's definitely worth doing, like 100%.
Well, it's I've fulfilled all the requirements. So do I really want to start from zero in another country, or spend the money for a Caribbean one or something like that? That's really the
Right.
what the situation.
I think one question that people have about the Colombia citizenship process is if it's possible to meet the requirements without spending more than 6 months a year in Colombia, or basically what the physical presence requirements are. Do you just need to have the residency for 5 years? Do you need to spend a certain amount of time in Colombia? Maybe if on paper you don't, but like in reality, in order to get accepted, you probably should. Like, what's your sense of it?
My sense is right now, I believe that there was a requirement that you have to be here one day a year, or maybe it was one day every 6 months. There was definitely a physical presence requirement. I believe with 2020 they waived that for that year, but it was technically like, yeah, you were supposed to be here once a year, and so it's a pretty low bar. You don't have to stay here a ton of time.
I think that would be encouraging to a lot of people.
Yeah, but there's all these crazy changes. I mean, they've done a lot of changes to the visa stuff recently. They've really shaken it up, But they have introduced a Nomad visa now, which is pretty easy to get. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah, that stuff's kind of lame though. In what ways have they shaken it up?
well, the Nomad visa, that was one
Mm,
thing. Like people can definitely get that easier now than or because basically everybody before was just doing, oh yeah, I'm doing a Spanish school, and they would come and get like the student visa, and that was pretty easy. But it seems like the bar is pretty low for the digital nomad one. I think it's you have to show like $1,000 a month of income or something like that. Um, but people definitely, or well, so also on the changes, like I said, they're basically not giving as great of visas. They're not giving this one that's valid for life that I have. They're giving like one step down from that now, even if you're investing a pretty large amount. And I should mention too, I don't think that these that you have to do real estate. Like I think you could do like a stock investment. I think you could have invested in bonds, even at that lower level, one that we were talking about. It's like an investment in Colombia in some form. Not it doesn't have to be real estate.
right. Yeah, I've heard of people that like split a purchase and they each like put like 30 grand in
Hmm.
and that worked.
Yeah, that's pretty smart then.
Yeah, I've definitely heard though that the higher level one is really worth it in terms of when it comes to renewing, which can be a headache and just sort of maintaining it.
Yeah, I know somebody who had the one below me, and then they had to renew it this year, and they screwed up the process, and they lost it, and then they had to go like they had to leave the country to go to Miami and do the to fix it essentially in the embassy there because they were running out of days in Colombia.
Wow, and they almost had to start again.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm not sure. I'm actually very curious about that because I don't know if now he's going to have a new cellular number or if they reinstated his old one. I actually haven't asked about that.
So I feel like you spent so much time in Colombia and Latin America. You're going on 7 years or something. You visited most of the countries. I feel like I should try to squeak out one or two stories from you, just kind of random things, but I almost don't even know what to ask. Do you have like one or two like go-to stories that you tell at cocktail parties or anything like that?
Um, Well, so one of the ones that comes to mind would be it's kind of about Venezuela as well, like the whole border region over there.
Hmm.
I did a trip to Cucuta, which is Uh, it's a Colombian city on the border of Venezuela, and we wanted to see what the situation is with Venezuelans like in that city, because being right there, obviously, over the years, like I've just seen this massive migrant influx of Venezuelans, and they're great people, and so I was just interested. Like we went over there, we went to check out the border, like the literal border, which is a bridge in this case. And so we kind of started walking, and next thing we know, we walked through like this one section, and then I think it's kind of like a no man's land in between Venezuela and Colombia. But there's no line, like there's no line on the ground. It's like this is the end of Colombia and this is the beginning of Venezuela. And so we were just walking around this area, and then the next thing we know, we had like a Venezuelan police asking us like, "What are you guys doing?" And we're just, "Oh yeah, we're just here in Colombia checking it out." Like, you guys are in Venezuela now, technically. And so that was super sketchy, and I learned a lesson.
What was the
But
lesson?
yeah, don't cross that bridge and just wander around. And we didn't have our passports with us. We didn't have. Uh, so as an American, you need a visa. So that was no bueno. That I was technically in Venezuela. My friend was European, so he could have entered, but he didn't have his passport with him or anything. And really, the only thing that saved us is that this guy works for the UN. And so when he said that to the guy, he was the guy. He wasn't going to try and like make us bribe him or anything like that or steal our phone. Um, but it was just crazy because as you're walking along that bridge, like on the legal border, I mean, you look over to your left, you look over to your right, and there's just all these people crossing a river, just illegal, just totally illegally. Like, but it's completely like everybody sees it. There's no,
Accepted.
the police are right there watching it happen, and they're not doing anything. So it's crazy. It's just the notion of like a border right there is really interesting, and that's changed now. Like that border is technically all open, and like the relations have changed. But that was crazy. That was a really bad idea. So don't do that.
So is it kind of like a free flow of movement now?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty free flowing before, really. To be honest, like you go there, and uh, again, we just stood out so much that they were like, "What are you guys doing?" And I mean, they don't ask like the local people. They're just walking back from Colombia to Venezuela and walking from Venezuela to Colombia, and nobody stops them. But then when we walked back through the Colombian side, where they were like, "Okay, what are you guys doing?" We're like, "No, no, no, we just crossed. We didn't even realize we crossed. Like, waved to that guy over there. He said we're good." And yeah, they let us back in without any hassle. But it's a super informal. It was already a super informal border, and seeing that in real life was just, it's like, oh, this is even crazier than I expected. It's
Well,
super wild,
now you
man.
can say you've been to Venezuela.
Yeah, so that's basically my story. Is that whenever anybody asks me if I've been to Venezuela, I can say that.
What countries you still gotta knock off?
I mean, I want to go into Venezuela proper. That would be number one on my list for sure. And I'm really interested in Bolivia, like La Paz and some of the smaller cities. Santa Cruz, I believe, is the name of the other one.
Hmm.
Looks really interesting. I've seen you guys post photos from there. That look really cool. Um, and I mean, I'm honestly not that interested in Uruguay. I could have gone when I was in Argentina, and just like we didn't even bother. So those are the two that really interest me the most. And I've been to Brazil a few times, and I mentioned that I was, learning Portuguese. It's just, if you're going to be on this continent, it's just such like a big country, and it seems super interesting. So even though I've been to Brazil, I just want to go to completely different parts of Brazil and explore.
Hmm. Definitely, man. Well, I hope you keep up the explorer spirit there. And yeah, I guess at this point of the podcast, you could promote anything that you want. Give a little shout out to the audience.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to promote. I won't do shameless Airbnb promotions. But no, shout out to you for doing this podcast, because I've been listening, and you have really interesting people on and really interesting stories. Like again, we've had some mutual friends that have been on. It's been fun to listen to their travel stories, and it's always cool to see the stuff you post on Twitter.
Thank you, man. I certainly appreciate that. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Today's guest has been Jam Master Nate. Nate, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.